After our meeting yesterday, I had discussions with the individuals representing the RACs and the Water Authority. And I'm not sure everybody understood completely, but those are volunteer positions. They are not paid. And they got their travel to come to Topeka, but they all have full-time jobs. It's volunteer positions. And so I wanted everybody to appreciate that fact with that group. Secondly, today I ask you to come prepared to discuss the organizations that have been submitted to us. The one that was submitted, put together by our research department, Victoria and Meredith, you have. And then the agencies sent one to us. Well, following that, also they gave to us an Excel file where we could move the boxes around if we wished. So you should have those two, the one they submitted and the new one, the Excel file that you can play with and move things around. And then we received one from the agencies. And I'd like to take a few minutes here in the beginning and ask the agencies to come forward and explain their reasoning for the way they organized their chart. If you would, please, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Again, I'm Earl Lewis with the Kansas Department of Agriculture and appreciate the opportunity to talk to you for a minute. But before I go into ours, I want to, again, thank you all for bringing this up and want to commend Meredith and Victoria for the work they've done. This is, as you can tell, a complicated system we're running here, and trying to get your arms around it and get everything in the right circle or right box is always a difficult task. But when we looked at that, and again, hopefully you've had a chance to look at what we sent, or we'll get a chance to look at that. Really, there were some things that we thought maybe we ought to add, and I can highlight those if you want, and maybe some things that we thought maybe didn't quite fit. And first, from my thinking, the purpose is to say, what are the activities in state government that are about management, regulation, planning for water? There's a lot of things that, could be thrown into that. Do you put fishing into it? Well, I don't, to me, that's recreation and not necessarily about the management of the water per se. And so again, there's judgment calls. I'm not saying one's right or wrong, but just here's how we've thought about it. The other kind of major thing I would say that we think about things a little bit differently is that on the org chart that I think Victoria and Meredith put together, again, appreciate the work they did, but I look at both the research and data and the water policy, and I don't think of those as things that are on their own, right? So I think about the water quality, the water supply, the emergency management or mitigation, and for the most part, those research or policy issues support those main missions, support our goals to have better quality water, to make sure we have an adequate supply, to make sure we can respond to emergency situations. And so we tried to move those research and data activities under either that water quality, water supply, and some of those are you can't split them. You have water quality and water supply. Mr. Chairman. Just
one moment, please. Committee, this file is in the S drive, and it's under March the 23rd. So if you want to pull that up on your screens, you can have it there as well. I'm sorry to interrupt. Please go ahead.
Absolutely. And so like I say, there's certain activities that you really can't define whether they're water quantity or water quality. They kind of serve both purposes. And so we put those kind of in the middle of those two, if you will. But we tried to, and I worked with both the Water Office and Department of Health and Environment to try and make sure that we had things where we could collectively see them in the right column, if you will. And then, again, there's some things that maybe different agencies thought, hey, here's something that we thought ought to be on the list, or again, maybe we thought didn't quite fit with that overall purpose of management and regulation of the water. And again, so that's kind of our thinking is again, trying to put, whether you've got water quantity policy, certainly the water planning under the Water Office fits that. Certainly a lot of things when you think about rules and regulations or things that we bring to you for legislation under the water, under DWR. I think in some cases you can count that as water policy. Likewise, the research and data. The majority of the work that we do with the Kansas Geological Survey, for example, is really focused on ensuring that we have good data and good models, good analysis that supports our goals of trying to, say, conserve and extend the life of the Oglala Aquifer. And so, you know, things like the well measurement program that KGS has or their models that really fit under the research and data category, but they're still trying to serve that overall purpose of that water supply. And so again, and I'm happy to hit on or answer questions on where we put any of these issues or things that we've added. I don't want to take up too much of your time because I know that the purpose here today is really for you to discuss and for us to answer questions that you might have.
We can't discuss until we understand it, but thank you. Do we have, at this point, do we have any questions from within the committee in the room or virtually? Do we have any out there? Is there any further detail you'd like to go into on this before we move on?
Well, I might just to kind of keep
whatever time you want,
priming the pump here a little bit while people get their questions. I might just hit on a few things that the agency added that weren't, from my quick comparison here this morning, that weren't in the bubble chart. So under water quality, kind of in the blue section, and the other thing is we tried our best to try and match the colors between the two. Didn't quite get it exactly right, but that was our attempt. So in KDHE's Bureau of Water, underground injection program and wastewater treatment, both from a regulatory standpoint, those are both programs that KDHE operates to regulate different activities. And their Bureau of Environmental Field Services, local environmental protection program, again, is an effort to try and work primarily with county officers to, again, address issues at the local level. Also under water quality, down under research and data, KDHE does a lot of water quality sampling. They do some HAB research and treatment in-house, and then obviously work with Biological Survey and K-State on that HAB research as well. Private water well education, and so again, I think Representative Jennings brought this up yesterday when we talked about the uranium in the Ark River Valley and some research that KDHE did to sample some domestic wells and try and help some folks there. And of course, the stream sampling with wildlife and parks we think fits under that category. I think everything in the next category, water quantity and quality, again, you can see kind of those things that we look at as both serving both quantity and quality. Again, you can make some judgment calls that maybe some other things ought to fit there. I'm not sure that we added anything to that from what was already on the other sheet. If we move over into water quantity, again, we talked about DWR's water appropriation program, bringing forward proposals and rules and regulations and those sorts of things that are policy. Under the regulation, we got water management. And so within DWR, again, you might remember we have three primary programs: water appropriation, which deals with the majority of our water rights issues. The water management also does some support in support of our appropriation program, primarily with a lot of the water right to water right impairment issues, some of our LEMA investigations, some of those type of things. Our water conservation areas is certainly something that kind of fits with that local enhanced management area, kind of two different levels of the same type of activity there. And so we added that. Under our planning and implementation, or I'm sorry, under cost share, Division of Conservation, that water supply restoration program. Again, this is a state water plan fund program that was initially targeted towards protection and restoration of our reservoirs, particularly our small community reservoirs. KDBO with their Reservoir Protection Initiative, again, that's a cost share program that ends up primarily running through the conservation districts to get best management practices on the ground in watersheds to try and slow down sediment coming into our reservoirs. Down under research and data, again, under that water quantity, KWO does collect data on our reservoirs through the bathymetric surveys program that they run. So that's something that is fairly new and was added to this. And the last under that section, DWR, we collect water use data every single year. Actually, just are finishing that up. The deadline is March 1st for every single water right holder in the state of Kansas to submit an annual water use report. And so we've done that since for the last 30 some odd years. And so really it's the between that and our water level measurements, which we do in cooperation with the Kansas Geological Survey, we probably have and I think maybe you heard Dr. Butler with KGS says, we probably have the best data maybe in the world between those two pieces of information. And it really drives a lot of our management and decisions that we can go out and work with folks. In the last category, safety and emergency management, I think the only things that we added, we certainly under DWR we already had the dam permitting, levee, and floodplain penalty. Stream obstructions, again, just a little bit of a nuance there from the dam permitting. So things that we get out into the stream, whether it's weirs or other things where we're changing the channel, is also a regulatory activity. We also run the National Flood Insurance Program on behalf of FEMA in Kansas. And so that's an implementation issue. The water office runs the drought response team when we get into the drought situation, and we felt like that fit under that category. KDHE Bureau of Environmental Field Services also has a disaster response, whether that's water issues where somebody's, their water system goes down, wastewater issues, if a wastewater system gets overwhelmed, chemical spills, those type of things, they're in that emergency response as well. And then we already had biological survey, and I think they talked about their flood mapping, which is kind of in my view, is somewhat of a real time we know how high the water level is going to get, or what's going to get inundated, so we can warn folks about that. Our water structures folks go out when it's times like this, when we're not in the middle of a flood, and really try and figure out where that 100 or 500 year flood is at. And then that really drives a lot of the local discussions about how do you keep folks out of harm's way in the first place. And I think I may have missed some things, so I apologize, because I was trying to compare them here real quick before the committee. But I think those are the things we added. And I think there were a couple things we probably left off. I know one of the things, again, that on the emergency side, wildlife and parks with the rescue program, and again, not that that's not a valuable or doesn't have anything to do with water, it absolutely does. But again, does it fit in are we trying to manage the water with that program? And again, judgment call, we said, I don't think that's really about water management, that's about life and safety. Again, very important, but which table do you put it on? So.
I'll start the questioning with over in the safety and management, you have the floodplain mapping.
Correct.
And that's the FEMA program. Now, just for everybody's information, how is that done? Is that LIDAR, or how do they do that? Yeah, in LIDAR, it is really light detection and ranging, so it's somewhat of a newer technology, I guess, here in the last 20 or 30 years. It gives us a better 3D surface, what's actually out there across the landscape. And so, yes, we use that data in a geographic information system approach. Then we take the historic maximum rainfall situations we've had, whether that's 100-year rainfall or, again, 500-year, and we apply that through some models to the landscape, and that'll tell us how much water should be flowing at a certain point along a stream. How high is that water going to be? And then using that LIDAR, then we can say what land is going to be inundated at that 100-year flood or the 500-year flood, and then draw those lines and go out and, again, work with the counties, work with the communities and say, here's where that line looks to be when we have a 100-year flood. And then it becomes a county situation or a city situation obviously counties and cities are in charge of zoning in their own boundaries. And what do they want to do about that? And certainly our overall goal is to keep people on property out of harm's way. And so if we can encourage folks to not build houses and those sorts of things in those areas we know are going to flood, then that's going to be better for us in the long run.
Our challenge a lot of times you might expect is when we get better information, or you heard Dr. King yesterday talk about urbanization and that change in the hydrograph. Well, what that really means is if we get a lot of urbanization in some areas, we're going to have things that flood that didn't used to flood. And so maybe I built my house in one spot and we've got a lot of development upstream, and now the water gets to my front door, but it didn't used to. And so when we go back and redo those and see that that changed, and go back and have that conversation with that community and county, as you might expect, there's a lot of times folks get a little upset because now they're in the floodway and they weren't before, and that ends up costing them more money in insurance and those type of things.
That caused me personally a lot of heartburn, the last one you did. How often do you have to do these FEMA maps?
Well, it's more on the demand of our population, right? So we're going to focus on the areas that got the higher population. The overall goal was to try and get the entire state done. But again, we're working with local communities. And so there's not necessarily a set time frame to come back every 10 to 20 years. But I'd say if we're in those more urbanizing areas, I think that 10 to 20 years is probably a reasonable time of revisiting. If you get out in areas that don't have a lot of change, then we're talking about, we're looking at maps now that were drawn in the 70s and 80s at this point, and saying, can we go back, now that we have LiDAR, because we didn't at that point, can we do a better job?
So recently you've done the Kansas River Valley, and you're doing the Meridocene now, or is it done?
I'd have to we can get you the map that shows what our current activities are, because it's kind of, again, it's somewhat of a patchwork, because you got to work with the local communities as well. And some of them are, as you might expect, a little more interested in doing that, and some of them want to put it off a while. So we can get you a map of our current projects.
Okay, I'd appreciate that. And I think St. Mary's and Bellevue, I think those have been delayed until later this fall or later in the year before they're finalized. But, and then if I remember right, because I came in because of all the phone calls and emails I was getting and got a little education on this. But you have hydrologists doing all kinds of studies on that as well, and that plays into the map.
Yeah, absolutely. So so just logistically, the way that most of the funding comes from the federal side. And so if you remember our budget, there was a pretty good chunk that was federal funds. And that's really the vast majority of the federal funds within DWR is money that comes from FEMA for that purpose of going out. And what we do is there's a number of companies that do this, and engineering and consulting firms that specialize in this type of work. And so we've got 3 or 4 of them that are on contract doing different projects. And yes, they take that data and they have the engineers and hydrologists that do that work for us, and then come back and bring that product to us. We have a few in-house that help manage the projects and make sure that what they're bringing to us makes sense, but the bulk of the work is done by the private sector in this case.
Your office takes all the calls, so.
Yeah, we take a few calls on that, yes. Yep.
Questions? Representative Newland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Will events like the '07 flood down in southeast Kansas, does that trigger the remapping of the floodplain areas? And is that primarily only the state, or does the federal get their hands into it because that's where you get the flood insurance from?
It can. It doesn't every time, but it certainly can. If we look at something like, say, like the '07 flood and say, boy, the numbers were way off, or the maps were way off, then I think that's something we'd want to revisit. And we have a pretty good working relationship with FEMA, and our folks sit down with them at least quarterly and go over every project and where we're at, and in situations that have come up, and what communities are interested in, which are not. And so it's kind of a cooperative relationship we have with FEMA on that. But certainly there are times where they say, here looks like an area that we have not addressed for a long time, and we're seeing recurring damages from flooding. Let's take a look at that.
Is that triggered by the local communities, or is that triggered by the state?
It can be either one.
Either one.
Yeah, it can be either one.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
In my area, it was triggered by a local request. Representative Riley.
As you added things to the chart here, it got me thinking that perhaps one of those possibilities that might be added, and it seemed to be all over the different places, is the work that you do as far as approving loans, approving grants that go out to different places. So, I mean, that's a lot of different places are doing that, right? But that
Correct.
is an important part of your role of different things that you do.
Correct, yeah.
And then on that same hand, your cooperation, not just necessarily your department, but the water organizations, their cooperation with, I'm going to say, KDOT and, you know, looking at roads and water and you know, how they play nicely with each other.
Right.
And then the other part of that, of course, is also the county commissioners and the road and bridge and that same kind of thing too. So I don't know whether that needs to fit in here anywhere, but you know, that cooperative thing between those departments. Thanks.
Yeah, so I would, you know, some of the, I appreciate those are, you're exactly right on all those points. So I think, you know, some of the loan or grant programs we have captured in here, I think we need to go back and look and make sure we have them all captured. But certainly things like the Department of Commerce's Community Development Block Grant Program, KDHE's Public Water Supply Loan Program, you know, some of those are on here, but we might need to revisit that, make sure we've got them all. And you're right, I guess, you know, from our perspective, both with, we do have a good working relationship with KDOT on the bridges, like you say, and trying to make sure that you know, what they're building is going to meet our standards and those kind of things. I guess my view on that is that fits within our water structures permitting process. And likewise with a lot of the county commissioners. But again, I think it's kind of a judgment call. We want to make sure that you and everybody else understands how that interaction happens and how do we capture that correctly without this getting to be, you know, overwhelming. And so we can continue to work on that as well.
Following up on Representative Riley's comments, would it be possible for the agency org chart if you would either list or put a star beside those that are either additions?
Yep.
Or the changes from the one we originally received from research?
We'll do that.
Will help us in our studies to follow up on that.
We will do that.
Representative Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would, as I recall from looking at the spreadsheet version, there is quantity and quality in one column and quantity only in the next column. And the interstate compacts are in the quantity column. And it seems to me that it ought to be either in both or possibly moved into quantity and quality. If that turns out to be one of the recommendations from this committee. And I don't know if that means that if we are going to be looking at the quality of the water that is flowing into the state and addressing that through some kind of change in the compact, an addendum, a rider, whatever we can come up with, does that also mean that we have to do a better job of looking at the quality of the water that is flowing through Kansas and then into other states?
I think it is kind of like, just as you're pointing out there, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword of how we state that, right? And we want to make sure that we are getting good quality. We want to be good neighbors and provide good quality water, but we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we set ourselves up for litigation later on. You're probably right that, you know, we have 4 interstate compacts. Certainly the Blue River Compact has a quality component built right into it. It was the last compact done. And certainly the Ark River Compact with Colorado has a usable state line flows, and we're, you know, figuring out what the usable portion means from a water quality standpoint. I'd say the Republican with Colorado and Nebraska is a quantity only, as well as the compact with Oklahoma on the Ark is a quantity only at this point. And so those compacts are state law. Let's say the one with Oklahoma is state law in Kansas, identical language state law in Oklahoma, and it's also adopted by Congress, so it's federal law. And so getting any changes to those compacts is difficult at best, I would say. But that doesn't mean we can't continue to work within that structure to try and make improvements or share information and try and, again, make our water quality better.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it strikes me that it sounds like this is something that needs to also involve our legislative delegation in DC.
Yes, yep,
And we have been in contact with them.
yep.
It's a serious issue. Other questions? Getting off easy today.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time, Mr. Lewis, and for clearing a lot of these things up for us. Committee, any other discussions on the org chart or any other topics you wish to bring up at this time? Did you bring your calendars?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I had one quick question.
Speak.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, that organizational chart I thought was really helpful. I like the way they did that. I wish our printer printed in color in our office here, but I was just wondering if we, and maybe this is a topic for the interim committee in the summer or something, but I'm just wondering if there are any states out there that have a reputation for really excellent handling of water issues and or organizations that really handle this effectively. If rather than starting from total scratch, maybe there would be 2 or 3 states that could be recommended to us by our water experts to look at their organizational charts and so on and see what they do, and at least give us some different ideas maybe on how we could organize our water plan here in Kansas.
We can ask that question, and we'll ask that question of them if they have any suggestions, but I also refer you back to Professor Griggs' comments. His statements were that Kansas may be the best organized of all the states at this point.
Okay, that's encouraging.
But we'll ask for suggestions, obviously.
Okay,
from the agency.
Appreciate it. All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Representative Bishop.
I just wanted to throw this out there. If anybody's interested in traveling for our summer meeting, in the city of Wichita, we have a venue called the Water Center. And it's on the banks of the Arkansas River, and I believe would be large enough for a committee meeting. If you were interested, I would be happy to check into that. I don't know. I know you're trying to get this approved, and traveling may not be in the cards, but I just thought I'd mention it.
Money's a little tight, as you know, and apparently we are spending more than we have, so it's going to be interesting. But the interim committee meeting, I told them it would be primarily a WebEx meeting to keep the cost down. If we do any travel, it'll be on your own nickel, unfortunately, and I'm not sure I would commit the committee to that. But Representative Jennings.
I'd be curious, Mr. Chairman, that if sponsor were identified and willing, or multiple sponsors were identified and willing to step up and support the travel expenses and lodging and such that might be associated, I think I'd be willing to make the same offer as a representative from Wichita with respect to Garden City. And that in terms of water issues generally, not certainly diminishing the importance of the urban water issues, sometimes just seeing what that looks like out there has, I know others who have not experienced it leave with a far different view, not only of the area, but particularly of the importance of water to all of the related agricultural industries. And I'd be happy to hunt around and see if we could find sponsors to support that kind of thing if you were open to that.
I love it. So we have a competition going. Whoever comes up with the best package will be put before the committee for consideration, probably through emails and so forth. But if that can be arranged, then I'm all for it. I mean, and the committee might get to an area of the state they've never seen before. That would be a great experience. So with that, getting your calendars out, is there any time in August that you are not available? Okay, early August, I hear, because of harvest. Any other comments? Representative Carlson. Okay, so another vote for earlier August. Representative Carlson, did you have a comment? While waiting, Representative Vaughn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we could do it after the primary for municipals, that would be great as well. Thank you.
After the August primaries, which are what, August 4th, 5th, 6th, somewhere in that range? The 3rd? Okay. So we're down to after August 3rd and before, what date did you say? Okay. Between the 5th and the 15th. So go ahead, Representative Riley. We're looking at the 11th, 12th, or 18th, and 19th. Okay, so if you would block those dates out, and what we'll do then is whoever the big bidder is that can arrange for the sweetest deal, and if we can get some support for this, we shouldn't have any problem with the LCC doing this, but it obviously has to be advertised, and we'll have to be able to broadcast it to whoever wants to hear the meeting all over the state and possibly other states as well. Interesting stuff. But so we will get back with you when we get the information back in. We'll try to get this arranged, hopefully, by late June, 1st July, so everybody can have it solidified in their calendars. We'll have this meeting. Please study these organization charts when we get the new one back from the agency that has the changes and also highlights where they've added information or where they have taken information out. We'd appreciate that. So with that, any other comments, suggestions from the virtual world? We're looking at Representative Stogsdill out there. Representative Bishop.
I would just like to thank staff, all staff, for the extraordinary work they've done on this. Thank you.
I certainly echo that as well. Our staff has worked very hard. Victoria and Meredith. Representative Stogsdill, he wants to speak again.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I just wondered, when is I forgot what the dates are for the Meet in the Middle conference out in Lindsborg? I thought that was in August.
We have people looking right now. Hang on.
I was just thinking if we were going out in that part of the state, it might be nice to be able to attend both events.
That meeting, sir, is in July 21st.
Oh, is it? Okay, never mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Our staff went above and beyond this year. Damien worked very hard. The S-Drive, he put that together. It's wonderful. You can find anything you want now, and everything we've done, the entire session is there. So you can go back and look anytime. And remember, take your state-issued computer home because that's your ticket to get into the system. It's the only computer you'll be able to get in there. Your home computer, you can't because of the security. And that's through the VPN. Anything else, Representative Bishop? Thanks to the committee. You've all been great. A lot of good questions, a lot of help. I expect more out of you. When we have our little meeting, I expect a raucous event. We are adjourned and have a good vacation.